think you're in for a real treat right now. We have had kind of a scene setting throughout the morning. You've heard about economic outlook. You've heard about the regulatory burdens that are confronting growers trying to be economically sustainable in the state of California. And we're just trying to give you an overview of some of the challenges that are being faced currently. And during this panel, we want to open it up to what are the opportunities to solve some of those challenges, not only looking at regulatory costs, but looking at labor and all the different things that are making it much more difficult to farm, as I said, economically sustainable in the state. So I'm really pleased to have three great speakers. In fact, I don't think I really need to be actually a moderator for this because they all have plenty to say, starting with Walt Duflock, who's the Senior Vice President of Innovation for Western Growers, followed by Mike Way, the CEO of Primetime International, and Rob Trice, who's the founding partner for Better Food Ventures and the Mixing Bowl. And so they're going to share with us today. We're going to kick off kind of with Walt setting the stage for what the labor challenges are, and then go into Rob's perspective on some of the overview of the venture capital perspective on what's happening to try to solve those challenges. And I think those of you who've heard Mike Way before know that he's going to deliver this real boots-on-the-ground farmer and business perspective on what this all means going forward. So, Walt, why don't you go ahead and kick us off?
Thanks, Sarah. Morning, everybody. So let's put some meat. It's always good to come behind Lynn because Lynn set the table very nicely, gave us an overview of the regulatory cost. So what does that mean to farming operations across California? What it means is that California pays about $16.3 billion for 850 million hours of farm work, right? Let's just wrap our arms around that number. That's the starting point, right? So we pay for a lot of farm labor costs that are impacted by the data that Lynn has collected and put out there for us. And if we break that hour count down, Lynn did some more research on acres per crop per activity. It's about 1/3 non-harvest, 2/3 harvest, right? And that labor is getting more expensive, and I'm glad that Lynn added onto this at the end, because H-2A is an increasingly growing component of labor in this state. Right now, we're at a 90% in-state farm worker, 10% H-2A immigrant farm worker count, 44,000 H-2A workers last year. And that number comes with not just AWAR, the adverse effect wage rate, $19.96 now, but actually housing, transport, and food. In essence, when people say we're in trouble if we get to $30 an hour labor, good news, folks, we're there when you add those three costs in for H-2A. So how do we solve labor? Well, one of two ways in general. Either we automate and solve for that, or we relocate the acreage, thus the move to places like Arizona, Mexico, and South America at increasing rates. So how are we doing on the automation front? For non-harvest, we're doing reasonably well, right? I think we've automated about 2 to 3% of that labor cost, that hour cost for non-harvest with things like carbon robotics, laser weeders, sprayers from Gus, harvest assist with things like Burrow and similar units. In harvest, we are not very far along, right? So that's 560 million hours of harvest labor that's under some of the most intense time pressure, because if you miss a weeding window, little bit of a hit, you get extra weeds, you can fix that. You miss a harvest window, little bigger problem, right? And so for the 280 million hours of non-harvest labor, we are going to get from 2 to 3% to about 20 to 25% in the next 5 to 7 years, primarily because carbon robotics, which took 5 years to get to 100 units, is going to take less than 2.5 to get to the next 100. And Burrow took about 6 years to get to the 500 unit mark. They'll take less than 3 years to get the next 500 sold, right? So as these units increase, we get more hour savings. And the goal for automation is to reduce that upward pressure on H-2A costs, because they're only going up. What happened to that 44,000 number? It's basically a tripling in the last 5 years, right? So that's how H-2A got to 10%. So If we can automate it, that's great. A lot of the production can stay with both harvest and non-harvest. If we can automate it, increasingly the acreage will look to move.
Thanks, Walt. Rob, talk to us a little bit about the dollars that are behind this move to automate or not.
Or not, yeah, I think that's important. So a little bit of background on me. So I'm not a fifth generation farming family or anything. I'm a nice suburban kid. I spent 15 years in mobile internet telecom venture capital. I got bored of that, and my wife started running a cattle ranch out on the coast. And so I'm walking around that ranch and decided, hey, wait a minute, how hard could this be to get information technology applied to food and agriculture? And so I launched the Mixing Bowl, and we did the first agri-food tech event in Silicon Valley 11 years ago. And simultaneously, I launched Better Food Ventures to go make investments into companies applying information technology across the food and ag value chain to make a positive impact now. And when I launched the Mixing Bowl, we talked about what we really wanted to do was see the issues, seek solutions, solve problems, and scale those solutions. And my frustration with this innovation ecosystem is that 80% of our effort is still focused on seeing the issues and seeking solutions. Only 20% is solving and scaling. We need to flip that. And so one thing, Sarah, you may not know, earlier this year, with a couple other troublemakers, we launched a nonprofit with a name that just rolls right off the tongue called COSAF, the Collaboratory for Open Software and Services in Ag and Food. Because I think that there are two limits we have not yet squeezed to really make a difference in terms of innovation. One is open source and the other is collective impact. I can circle back on those later, but I think that given what I now know about innovation in this space, there is a play for venture capital, but there are limitations to that model. And so going back to your original question, when I started doing this, there was $2 billion in agri-food tech being invested globally. That shot up to a peak of $53 billion. And then, bam, crashed down to about 15 or so, 16, I think, last year. And we're on a trend that we might get there, to 15 this year, but I'm not that optimistic. I think we'll probably be around 12 to 15 or so. We've had hundreds of startups backed, and we're still not solving problems. And then what are we seeing instead? A bunch of used vertical farming equipment available on eBay, right? And we got, instant food delivery to our front door, but we got a long ways to go. And so we're not getting that adoption. And so just in terms of us at Better Food Ventures, we're a classic seed stage investor. We've made 25 investments. Our average investment size is 50 to 100K to get started. Then we have these special purpose vehicles, and we put money behind those to continue to get behind these companies. On the ag side, we've invested in 3 robotics companies. One's called Farm & G. Another one's called 4 Growers that is actually doing harvesting in greenhouses of vine tomatoes. And then the other one we just closed is a company called Beagle Tech that I wouldn't even call a robotics play. It's more of a mechatronics. It has an AI controller box that you can slap on an existing tractor, go through and do a pruning of your vineyards or harvest celery. But the issue there is they're not trying to get 100% of your labor removed. Maybe take 80 or 60% of your labor out. And that's a nice stepping stone to complete automation. So I would say if there's a general thing, a trend for us at Better Food Ventures, we don't invest in the sexy stuff. We're looking at how can we remove mule work and, pen and paper from production and the supply chain. And I'll stop there.
All right, thanks. Yeah, we'll be able to dig in a little bit more into some of the both pathways and barriers to some of these innovative new things. But Mike, to share a little bit about Prime Time, how you got started, and where you're growing things now.
Okay, little background. I'm not in this sphere with these two gentlemen. I live this every day. I sell produce every day. I talk to customers every day. I farm every day. I deal with labor every day. Prime Time's a mid-sized California agriculture company based in Coachella. We started in 1992 growing a few bell peppers, a few other items, and in '96 decided to go full bore to bell peppers, have them 52 weeks out of the year. We fast forward 24, 28 more years. We do have bell peppers every day of the year. We're now heavy into asparagus in Peru and in Mexico. I don't grow one spear of asparagus in California or the United States. We do have other items. We do harvest and grow all winter crops. Our partnership with Ocean Mist out of Castroville. We have lettuce, broccoli, cauliflower, artichokes, the total gamut, and we harvest that out of Coachella. So I'm based in Coachella. Our biggest operation for California is in Ventura County out of Somas. I have a packing facility. We have 1,500 acres there, and I also grow in Bakersfield.
And South Carolina?
Well, you want to go there now?
Go for it.
Well, let's get it started. Again, we're sitting here in California and getting our brains beat in with costs that are through the roof, going up against my competitors in the East Coast, which are paying $8 and $9 an hour labor, and we're dealing with the same customers. And what's my choice? My choice is to shrink my acreage and go elsewhere is really the only opportunity that we have. And tomorrow I start a harvest operation in Fairfax, South Carolina. Thank you. It's the real world people. And there's other people in the area. Other California shippers have come to South Carolina and a few other places, met by Lindsey Graham, met by Tim Scott, met by people that want them in South Carolina. Not like this state that we're living in, that they are against what we are doing every day. We are the negative of what they think about agriculture in California, and we need to be put back on the top going forward. This has to change. The concept of us doing negative things to water, to land, and growing crops that aren't healthy is just absolutely crazy. And it's a frustrating deal every day to deal with. But I'll just tell you that the ag community is the greatest community in California. Everybody from Eureka to El Centro is the greatest people. But somehow we've lost our way with the regulations in California and with the politics in California, with labor and everything against us. We somehow have to stem the tide here and get them back on our side. And that's the goal in the next 5 or 6 years, or we're going to be in big trouble. There's no question.
Well, certainly part of this panel is to help educate people, not only this discussion, the one previously about the costs and how difficult it is. And you're living it every day, Mike, so we appreciate your perspective. I also want to remind you, please send in your questions on Slido, because I'll keep asking them if you don't see any pop up here on the screen. But let's start a little bit, Walt, and have you talk about your board at Western Growers, and Mike is one of those. You wanted to actually do something to solve this innovation challenge, and so you've got several projects underway. Can you just give us an overview of those and how you're hoping to get past these labor challenges?
Yeah, I think most of my waking hours are spent with automation startups and with growers. So we look a lot at the global set of opportunities, and we brought a couple of startups, and my colleague Ben Pallone is here. Ben's done a fantastic job. We took a company called Eco Robotics that was over in Europe. This is just one example. There's another one, Nico Robotics. You don't have to be named something with eco in your name, but it turns out our first two are. And the trick for Eco Robotics was take a product over in Europe that's working for the European market and see if we can bring it here. And how can we get them into the market? How can we get them effectively selling into the market, supporting in the market, when their headquarters are thousands of miles away and their manufacturing is thousands of miles away? And so we brought Eco Robotics in here after FIRA USA, one of the shows that we put on, focused on automation and robotics. And within 60 weeks, they sold 60 sprayer units at about $250,000 each. Each one of those is meeting the growers' needs around economics, and each one of those is getting more hour relief from the H2A and domestic workforce. And so our goal is to find these international companies. Increasingly, when you look at automation, there's 700 robot startups, right? Robotics. If we had every one of them calling every grower, it wouldn't work, right? Set up a trial, set up a trial, set up a trial, set up a demo. We want to be the interface between those startups and getting into the U.S. market. We have partners that help with that. And so we want to find more eco-robotics because it turns out roughly half of those robotics companies are nearby, roughly half are not. And so we go to faraway places to see these companies. We go to France to see World Fira. We go to Australia to see Evoke and some of that stuff. So the trick is, how can we bring startups here to help them get into this market and help our growers? How can we help them trial? How can we help them deliver results? So we've not only brought companies into the U.S., we've actually done a case study around carbon robotics and Stout, a laser weeder and a mechanical weeder, to show the growers and the startups, here's one common set of math we can use so that we're all on the same page. Because before we did that, the startups would have math that looked like the growers but didn't quite match up. Now, hopefully, with these case studies and economic templates, it matches up. So our whole goal is to just make the interplay between the startups and the growers happen faster so that when they're ready to commercialize, we've got a place and partners to help them commercialize and get to the growers faster.
And so, Mike, are you starting to invest in labor-saving new tech as a result of what you're seeing?
A little bit. We work with Walt and team on a few things. We were with them 6-7 years ago when they started with the burrow and a few other things. But my crop's a little bit different. I have to pick it 5 or 6 times to get the yield. So robotics in field bell peppers aren't something that's going to happen in my lifetime. I can tell you that. But the stuff in the greenhouse operations a little bit different than what I do, but we're open to everything. I mean, we've invested some money in some stuff, and again, we're going to talk about it, I think. But I mean, if we could get a mechanical harvester for asparagus, it would change California. We'd be back in the asparagus business. But there's now 30,000 acres down to 500 acres of asparagus in California. It's the greatest growing area in the world, from Sacramento to Irvine to Turlock to Gonzales to El Centro to Coachella. I mean, all these places could grow asparagus, but we can't afford to pick it 3 or 4 times a day or 2 times a day, whatever it takes. And you would think it would be easy to get something robotic to harvest asparagus. We have the technology to do the packing in efficient ways, but it's the harvesting of asparagus that has led to the downfall of the volume.
Sir, can I jump in?
Sure, Rob.
So we did a prep call for this, and Mike said, if we could get a robot for asparagus harvesting, we could bring 30,000 acres back in California. I'm like, well, they're out there. There's what do you want, white or green? There's a Belgian white asparagus picking robot, and there's a French, UK, green asparagus picking robot that admittedly is a little early, right? But when I talked about this collective impact approach, what I mean is we need a shared innovation pool, because you on your own, you don't want to carry the burden of developing the Muddy Machines green asparagus robot. But how could you have the Asparagus Association, if one actually exists, go in there, or Western growers, play that role as a backbone organization to support a pre-competitive shared innovation, right, to bring that to market, right? So we pass a hat around and get that thing and save California asparagus, right? So that's what I mean by that collective impact approach, that I think is just the way that we got to move forward. We got to move together. I mean, there's other places like almonds where California is the king, and we can call the shots. But in other places like, tree fruit, for instance, we're a little more wobbly. And I think we've got to work, for instance, with the Europeans, with the Aussies and the Kiwis, come more collectively together. So the definition of what a collective area is and who needs to work together will vary. But I think I just want to give a shout out to Western growers and the work that Walt and team have done. More than almost any other trade association, they've been out in front, really understanding innovation. Most of the trade associations are set up to promote, and they're not necessarily looking at innovation and technology. And I really want to give Western growers like an attaboy, because they've done some really good work. And I think they've been a good case study for other trade associations to look at the path that they need to step down.
Yeah, Walt, would you just share a little bit more about how you are bringing some of these early innovators together to share some of the common practices and solve these solutions?
Yeah, well, one of the new initiatives, and Sean Sundberg from Deere is here with us, and Reservoir Farms is not, but I'll mention Reservoir Farms. So what we've done now is we took the physical manifestation of the Center for Innovation and Technology, a shared workspace building in the Taylor Farms building in Salinas, and we said, that's great, but if it means that robot companies come down and shared workspace and have grower meetings, that's part of the equation. But the far bigger equation is how can we get these guys near acreage with R&D facilities so they can do the work. So what Reservoir Farms is, and the first one launches, really it's launched now, just barely going off of Highway 68 in Salinas at Hitchcock Road, very public location, which has been interesting to watch it happen live. But basically what we're doing is, what if we set up the world's first on-farm robotics incubator where startups could work feet away from acreage that's commercially grown and available 24/7, 365. So we always want to bring people to FIRA USA and Desert Difference and see our events, because nothing moves a sales operation and an opportunity forward like getting guys like Mike Way in the dirt with these robots, right? So we love that. But FIRA is 3 days and Desert Difference is 2, right? If we get Reservoir Farms, the Salinas location, when we get it rolling, it's going to be available 24/7, 365 for growers to come by. So we really want to make that happen. And then to Rob's point, we are starting to differentiate those two work segments. In the case of non-harvest, I think venture capital will continue to flow. Rob's right, at reduced rates, but that will help us get Burrow and Carbon Robotics and Stout and Gus and folks like that to a good spot without more involvement from us other than market entry and support. But in harvest, we're taking some new approaches, taking a look at some new approaches. One of the approaches is exactly what Rob talked about, and Rob and I have talked about this a little bit, and nothing to announce yet, but imagine a world where 5 to 10 of our growers come in with a collaborative set of capital, fund an R&D effort through an RFP process, and then get a little bit of time to have that as an advantage, but then open that up to everybody, right? So we're working with models like that where shared grower collaboration, shared grower economics can get us to a harvest machine that's built without venture capital and can get us to a point where that machine is then scaled out to the rest of the market with as-a-service plays and plays that don't require $1 million for a laser weeder, right? So we're looking at projects like that. And I will give a shout out to Cal Poly, and Lynn's here. I'd do it even if she weren't here. The Strawberry Center is a great model, right? The Strawberry Commission funds 3 professional engineers to build what the strawberry industry decided were their priorities that were not venture fundable. They weren't large enough, right? And 3 of the 8 are now in commercialization on the Central Coast, thanks to student teams doing the work with these professional engineers with industry funding. We love that model. I'd love it even if I weren't a Cal Poly alumni. But why is it just Strawberry Center? Why isn't there Lettuce Center? Why isn't there Tomato Center? Why isn't there Almond Center? We're not sure. We're working to make some of that happen.
Well, just to bring that down to earth, like one of those 3 products that's in the market is a plastic hole punching implement that can be an industry standard. That's not a venture capital opportunity, but that's the picks and shovels. That's removing the mule work out of agriculture that I don't think anybody objects to.
So Rob, when you're looking at making investments, what are you looking for right now?
In terms of like technologies and
New technology.
So I'm going to be really honest. When we started this year, I was down on the space. I mean, we've taken a beating in the space, and we haven't had any big unicorn exits, and I didn't know where we were going to invest. And the question that I dreaded being asked was, well, what gets you excited about agri-food tech investing? Then it's like somebody flipped a switch February 1st. We had like 5 really interesting companies just walk in the door. And we've ended up doing 2 deals so far. I mentioned one of them, Beagle Tech, that I would call mechatronics for specialty crops. The other one is a company, and it's actually a leftover from, it's more on the food tech side, but it's a leftover. Some other people put $20 million into creating these robots that mimic the olfactory sensors in the human body. Turns out we have these olfactory sensors not just in our sinuses, but in our stomachs, even our testes. And this thing can look at putting different combinations of food ingredients together and then seeing how the human body will react. And the first product that they've come out with is putting 6 ingredients together, putting that under the olfactory sensor in the stomach, and the body naturally produces GLP-1, which of course is the active ingredient in Ozempic, right? But no chemicals, no injections. So hopefully this thing will work. I'm on the trial right now, and clearly I could use a little weight loss. But if I think about, again, like the things that I want to remove pen and paper, I want to create shared values, supply chains, right? So I was just at an animal ag tech conference, and there was a panel up there, and they're saying less than 5% of the livestock market, cattle specifically, has a shared value chain, so that you can look at, from one cow to slaughter. And they think that within 10 years, it's not going to go above 15%, which is astoundingly low for me, someone who comes from a non-agriculture world. That's astounding, and I think that's low because I think more and more consumers are going to want to know Portlandia style where their food is coming from. And so we've invested in a company called Breeder that actually looks at the genetics of the cow and then follows that cow through the supply chain. And we have this interesting program with seed stockers where we can actually do a calf buyback program. And the interesting thing is the producer's not as interested in the premium that they can get if the cow gets a nice graded score at slaughter. They're more interested in the data because now they're getting the genetics of like, okay, this is the genetics of that cow, this is how I raised that cow, and this is how it performed at slaughter. And they haven't had that closed loop system before. So the more that we can do that, we have another company called Milk Movement, MOOV, that is removing pen and paper from the wet milk logistics supply chain. These are not sexy things. This is not vertical farming, right? But this is where we're at. And I want to say one more thing, which is AI, right? We can't leave this panel and not talk about AI. And the thing that we want to remind everybody is before we can apply the magical fairy dust of AI to agriculture, we have to crawl before we walk, before we run. And we need to remove records and data from a farmer's notebook, 3-ring binders in the office. We need to get those digitized. We need to have data in a digitized, standardized, machine-readable format before we can unlock the value of AI. So we're watching AI, but really, like one of our companies is a company called Bountiful, and the CEO says, we do machine learning, unless I'm talking to an investor, in which case I say, I'm doing AI. And I think that's the right answer, right? So like, we're on this glide path towards AI, but we got to put the digital plumbing in place. We got to break down the silos regarding data to unlock this digital future for agriculture.
Absolutely. Mike, I want to get to a couple of the questions here, but also just have you explain. There's a question about raising the federal minimum wage to $15. The last time you were on stage, we were talking about what the city of Coachella was doing to your wage rates in addition to what the state's already done. Talk to us a little bit about your labor force right now and the mix of domestic, H2A. What are you doing in the lack of having automation to solve some of your issues on the farm?
So the question there is interesting about taking the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. What will California do? I mean, is California going to go to $24 an hour to make a difference? I don't know. But be honest with you, labor right now, the amount of labor the last 2 years has really not been a problem in my world. Local labor, it's really, in our whole operation in California, we use H2A probably around 60%. We bring them in first week of May and they leave the last week of November. And the reason for it is that we haven't been able to rely on the local labor to be as consistent in the numbers they bring every day. The pusher bring 40 per crew and they bring 20. If they bring 15, it just makes our operation, it's hard to work every day with numbers that you're not getting. The H2A, they're guaranteed every day. They work hard, and So again, we're paying more than we probably should for hourly wage, but we're getting what we're paying for. So I would say that, I complain that we're paying too much, but again, we're getting the job done, and that's the key.
Absolutely. So one of the other questions that came in, Walt, was just asking about why are countries like France and the United Kingdom developing equipment before us in the U.S., and what are we missing, and what should we learn from that?
You know what? It's the old necessity is the mother of invention. When you go to Europe and you talk to some of those growers, they had the labor challenges before we did, right? They had challenges around immigrant labor. They had challenges around domestic labor. Their rates were higher before ours were. So a lot of the classic equipment came first over there because they needed it before we did. And so if you look at wine grapes, Poulenc had the first wine grape harvester, way back in the day, I think the 80s, the 90s. We put some wine in Monterey County on our ranch. And the Poulenc was out there ready to go, and our grapes, our wine grapes, have never seen a human harvest. From the 90s on, they've all been done via the Poulenc. And then at business model point, 5 years after that, my sister had 80 acres separate from our ranch she was growing grapes on. She had a little challenge with a labor crew. Somebody gave her an extra buck and took a crew away from her at the last minute, which can be a problem. And she found a guy found her that said, hey, I can do that for you for $500 an acre with the Poulenc. So not only are they first to market with the capital equipment, then the business model evolves. So the smaller vineyard in this case can actually have access to that same expensive machine on an as-a-service basis. So it helps.
Makes a difference. So let's talk about one other aspect, the regulatory structure here in California. Some of you may have seen that this finally made it to more of the general media when I think it was NBC News ran a piece about how you can drive or you can have a driverless car running around California. Of course, you wouldn't want to do that in LA right now, but you can have a driverless car, but you can't have I can't have a driverless tractor out in the field because of the regulations here. Thoughts on if that's going to change anytime soon, or what else we need to do in terms of educating people about the safety of autonomous vehicles?
So I can start. I'll leave the policy part of that discussion to Dave's panel at the end. What I will say is, when you talk to John Deere and guys like Sean, they will tell you there's a massive driver shortage across agriculture and across trucking. So we're short truckers by the tens of thousands. We're short tractor drivers by significant numbers. And the ability to use autonomous equipment on farm would be a huge solve, a huge unlock for that. So far, it hasn't happened for various reasons. But when that does happen, when we can't get autonomous, I think you're exactly right. Why can we have Waymo in downtown San Francisco and downtown LA on most days? And why can't we have autonomous farm equipment? And this is a case where the technology is there. The regulators have to catch up. And until they catch up, we're at a disadvantage.
If I can build on that, it gets to the earlier question of why are the UK and the Euros building those robots? We haven't created the greatest regulatory space for autonomous vehicles on the farm, right? These technologies are being developed in Silicon Valley, and they're being used on fields in Europe. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And I'll just say this, as we think about how we're going to solve these problems. Mike was talking about how farmers aren't held in the most positive light. I think this is one issue where suburbanites, urbanites are going to be sympathetic with farmers. And I think Cal OSHA needs to stand behind their position, come out publicly, and explain to the people why they're not allowing, automated vehicles to drive on unpopulated fields, right? Where they're enjoying Waymos in San Francisco and LA in school zones and crowded public areas. And I think this is one I would hope that we could get behind and really get the sympathy for the farmer throughout the state, which is, I think, where we need to go.
And let me add one point. I'll give a shout out to my colleague, Robert Medler from Arizona. He's worked with the legislature and growers down there and equipment manufacturers down there to actually get Arizona even more aggressively ahead on autonomous. So he's actually got language now, I think, that's passed in Arizona that's making it even more ag-friendly. So I think what we're going to see is other states are going to move in that direction Hopefully that serves as a little indicator for California that it's okay to come in, the water's fine. But I'll give Robert in Arizona a shout out. They've already made it happen down there like we want it to happen here. So there is precedent already going on.
So maybe we need to invite some more Arizonans over next year to have a discussion about what's going on there, that they're able to get things moving. One of the other questions came in, and I know if my friend Jenny Maloney was here from Bayer, she'd be talking about this, but the interaction between breeding and genetics and implementation of new technologies. I know she was talking about how they might be looking at breeding a taller pepper plant so that it could enable some of this harvesting. Mike, any thoughts on, are you talking to some of these folks now about what has to change in terms of the plants themselves?
Yeah, no question. Breeding genetics is a huge future in the next 10, 15 years. Working with Jenny and crew, as I said, today, a bell pepper, can I harvest it one time? No, there's no chance you can harvest a bell pepper one time and make a living growing it. You have to harvest it 4 or 5 times to get the yield you need to make it. So what we need to do is we need to genetically breed some plants where we get them 1 or 2 times. Cut the pick down from 5 to 2, 5 to 1. That would be able to bring in some robotic harvesting and do some work that way. But again, it's not a massive. Bell peppers is not something that Bayer is really interested in changing the world. I mean, strawberries and that kind of stuff is the sexy stuff. Bell peppers are kind of a boring item. So again, we're kind of stuck with what we have, and we're doing the best with what we have. But again, genetics, no question, that's where the future is.
Go ahead, Walt.
No, I just wanted to jump in. So I was at a Bayer Seminis field demo event last week with Ben, and it was impressive. You saw the opportunity and the challenge, right, around genetics. So Seminis does high-rise broccoli, right? It's a great product. But the innovator has a dilemma. So at that event, we saw 2 things. We saw high-rise products, high-rise broccoli and other genetics, and then we saw a broccoli harvester for standard broccoli, right, from Skagit Valley. Ben and I were beyond ecstatic because harvest is not making much progress. And here's a non-venture capital farmer who built a broccoli harvester for himself and now brings it down to show off. And it looks ready for prime time, no pun intended. And then you look and you say, all right, so what would it take Tony Wisdom, that farmer, to actually build a separate visioning system and a separate implement for high-rise broccoli? It would take some work. What's going to justify that work? High-rise broccoli getting into market with some traction, right? So he can't go out and do that work until high-rise broccoli establishes itself. So you can see the potential for high-rise broccoli to create a 3, 6, or 9-inch stalk that's easier for the human crew and easier for the robot. But until it gets traction, the innovator's dilemma is, I can't build that robot until I have someone to sell it to. So you can see the potential at Bayer Seminis Field Days. It's going to be a little before that's actualized.
This is one of the things I was going to say, just on the breeding side and genetics, that I think is an underappreciated asset that we have here in California. You think about, Apple, they're mostly an IP company, right? Same thing here in terms of you think about, like my former colleague Sean is running Dave Wilson Nursery. We got Sunworld, we got Driscoll's. We got this bleed over from the biotech venture capital space that we can take that, just like we got the robotics know-how, bleed over into agriculture. And I don't think we fully recognize what we can do to be a valuable and a continued leader in that space, even in agriculture.
One other question I wanted to add in is that, so we're talking about private sector investment, we're talking about venture capital, what Western Growers is doing, but traditionally in agriculture, we've had a strong movement from land-grant universities where they have done a lot of this research from the public standpoint and with public investments. Are our universities keeping up at all with this? Are you working in conjunction with them to do it in partnership when you're looking at new innovations and automation, or where are we in California with that?
So I think we're in a couple different places. I think, again, I'll give the Strawberry Center a shout out as one of the best industry university partnerships out there. And I'll give Davis some high marks for doing some good stuff on the innovation front, on campus and off. What I would say we need to do next is pick up the pace, right, for the universities. And what I would say is we need to do some volume work on the testing front. So you heard my number, 700 automation startups, 1,300 biological startups. Another, I agree with Rob, $12 to $16 billion in venture capital come in the next couple of years. That will add to those numbers, right? And all of those products, robots, biocontrols, biopesticides, biostimulants, they're all going to need tests, massive amounts of tests. And so I don't want all those tests happening on Mike's acreage because that's going to wear him out, right? It's going to wear all our guys out. What we want to happen is to have UCA and our make some commitments, and they're getting there. And we work closely with Glenda and Karen Ross, Secretary Ross, and Gabe Yahtzee's team to basically get them to commit to some level of tests, because the early stage tests for startups, they don't need to be on commercially grown acreage. They just need to prove that that product can work at all, and that that product can work at scale with no unintended consequences. Once they do that, then they're ready to see land at something like Reservoir Farms, which will be in more than Salinas soon enough. And then after that, let's go take it to Mike's farm and test it out. If we can get that filter process, that hurdle process for startups built right, so that phase 1 and phase 2 happen on UC and Cal State land and with co-op extension resources, and then only after they pass those first two, it works, and it works at scale, then we bring it into the commercial side, we will have taken so much time out of that process to get it to where it needs to get to. And so Gabe knows that. We're working toward that. We're doing more and more on that. But that's the number one opportunity for them, is just to get these thousands to tens of thousands of tests executed with us, so that the right stuff that makes it through the hurdle will get to the growers when it's ready.
And Mike, are you working with anyone in university systems now on any field tests or?
We are not.
I am going to disagree with my friend Walt. I get really frustrated.
It's on.
I get really frustrated when I see, particularly UC Davis, and like what they're working on many times was funded by venture capital years ago. And the folks are enjoying their bike rides around Davis. They're not getting out into the real world. Davis likes to say, we're only right down the road from Silicon Valley. What they mean by that is, Rob, you get up at Dark 100 and you drive out to Davis, I'll just get on my bike and I'll come into my office, right? You don't see the Davis folks actually out in the startup ecosystem that much, right? So I get frustrated because I see things that are disconnected from the real world and the real world short-term problems that we need to get solved here. I'm on the Dean's Advisory Board for Cal Poly. I like that learn by doing culture, where you've got students actually out there learning how to do practical things that are going to help. So that I have a little bit of a different viewpoint. I actually wish, for instance, on UC Davis, they have all of these great assets related to soil. They've never tied them all together. So for instance, or on the horticulture side, yeah, they have an indoor, a greenhouse program, and the California Light Institute is right there at Davis. They've never gotten those two together to look at how LEDs could be used for greenhouse growing, right? That's never happened. I'm watching UC Santa Cruz, actually, because right now they just launched an Ag Tech Alliance. They come from a much more collaborative vibe than you see at Davis. And then Merced is really, they're hustling right now. They're coming up the learning curve really quickly.
So, Sarah, real
Ceding my
quick.
time to Mike on this one.
No, it's okay. But in the real world, I do have 5 Cal Poly students going to work for me next month for 3 months, and I have 2 from Fresno State. So we're trying to teach some of these universities, some of these kids, some real world agricultural stuff. So we have an internship program. We're working with a couple of them.
Oh, terrific. Before we wrap up here, Mike, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you a little bit more. We talked about Mexico a lot last time you and I visited on stage. Tell us more about Peru and the differences that you're seeing there. I mean, it sounds like there's so much explosive growth in Latin America for, well, you can see what's happening with our imports, but talk to us a little bit about the differences between what you're doing in Peru and Mexico. Well,
Peru's an area that we're new to the last 5 years, but again, Peru is a area that's a great place to grow asparagus. Comes on a boat into Miami. We bring it in anywhere from 8 to 12 loads a week. It's a big deal for us, but the climate in Peru is somewhat similar to Mexico. The political thing changes every week in Peru. I'm actually supposed to have been there twice in the last 2 years to go see our operation, but both times there was political. The one time there was political unrest that Western growers canceled the trip to go. But I really want to talk real quick about Mexico. I don't know if you guys, we don't get the news that we get every day, but we're trying to grow produce in Culiacan, Mexico, the hub of Sonora, and the crime, the fighting, the gun shootouts that happen every day on the ranch, outside the ranch. I mean, we're trying to grow produce. I mean, this is just real world stuff that we're not really being told the truth what's going on in Mexico. It's a tough time right now in Mexico with all the fighting over the drug lords and the rest of so-and-so and them all trying to come together. But it is, when they tell you it's easier to go to Mexico, it's cheaper, but it's not easier. I'll tell you that right now. The infrastructure to build in Mexico is very hard to do. Keep people down there is hard to do. And to do it right is very hard to do. And when I mean do it right, I'm talking growing produce that's fresh, that's safe, and that can be eaten by everybody. And it's very, very tough in Mexico. We're not being told the truth there right now, but it is a tough place right now. Very, very scary to be down there. And I thank my employees every day that are down there, and we do bring them back home every so often, try and change them out, make sure that we don't get too tired down there.
And that would be a session all in itself, I think, just hearing more about some of your stories from there. Well, before we wrap up, the title is about the roadmap, and one of the things we wanted to share and hear from you is just what things you would like to see moving forward from lawmakers in Sacramento, especially regulators in Sacramento. What should the roadmap look like in terms of moving past our labor challenges, our water challenges? What would you like to see? Is it what South Carolina has? Is it what should we be telling people that has to change in order for California agriculture to remain competitive? And I'm going to start with you, Rob, and work our way back.
I got two, and I don't play in the regulatory space so much. But one, we've talked about these data silos in agriculture. I was just at an IFPA event yesterday, and they're talking about a New Zealand potato farmers have to input the same information into 6 different forms. And I had a similar conversation with someone at CDFA. I'm like, look, how could you be customer friendly and to Lynn's point, decrease the amount of time and effort it's required to fill out all of these different forms, right? There are write once, publish many, give you data sovereignty control. These solutions exist out there. How could CDFA help decrease the cost, the amount of time required to fill this out? The second thing is, I've talked to Secretary Ross about this, like the California Healthy Soils program collected all this data. There's no geotagging with that data. And so we're collecting all this great data. We don't know where it's at. And so you can't actually do anything with that. So it's kind of silly to be continue to collect that data if we haven't actually created geotagging. Yes, I know there are privacy issues. There are technologies that can take care of that. But those are my two. So like, let's talk about how we can get data working for us from a CDFA perspective.
Mike?
Mine is ag needs to be essential to California again. We need to get past this, whatever we're in now, where ag is a negative in this state. Regulatory and cost competitiveness is key to keeping California agriculture going. I'm talking produce now. I'm not talking about other stuff. But here's something I tell my wife and I tell everybody every day. If things continue the way they're going, from Eureka to El Centro, the communities of California are going to be torn apart because ag represents all philanthropy in these counties. I don't see Tim Cook and AI buying cows or pigs or sheep at the FFA sale. So there's a lot of stuff that ag does in California that some people don't really know about in Sacramento. And they need to understand that ag is what California is about. And it's what built California, and it needs to get back to where it was before.
It's tough to follow, but I'll try. Well said. 2 things. Matching capital as we get these grower capital projects engaged to help those dollars go further, because that's the only way we'll get harvest automation solved. And second, purchase incentives for capital equipment in terms of depreciation and tax treatment, helping folks buy this equipment and get it on their accounting system and through that faster is always going to work. We provide, for example, CARB payments of $110 million for EV tractors, which don't have a great use case for a lot of farms. Why not provide that same type of capital toward Burrow, Carbon Robotics, Stout? Pick your threshold on how you want to do it and who gets to use the funds. But that would accelerate purchase of a lot of these equipment for operations that are on the edge of being able to afford it. If we threw a little government incentive at it, that might get them over the top. So those are my two.
Sarah, can I make a super quick comment?
Sure.
And it relates to what Mike's saying, which is I come out from outside of agriculture, and Walt and I may have had a nightcap last night, and we were talking about the fact that, Walt is a LinkedIn star. You had 11,000 followers or something. I'm like at 10 or something like that. And we were talking about how can we get this voice out that, California farmers are important to the culture of California. How can we get everybody throughout the state recognize that value? There's a question of how you get California to speak as one voice. Coming from the outside, that's crazy that we can't actually get everybody working together. I looked at California Grown, that program. You want to know how many LinkedIn followers they have? 286. So they have 68,000 Instagram followers, 286 on LinkedIn, whereas Walt and I know there's like a serious dialogue about serious issues taking place. So let's pull up our socks, right? Let's do a better job.
Got to do something differently, that's for sure. Are all of you going to be able to stay a little bit for break if people have some additional questions? Because, great, there's more that came in. And I want to thank everybody that had this question. Also, if you bear with us just for a second, our sponsors make this event possible in addition to your participation fee. And if we could just show a video that talks about what Western Growers is doing, we thank them for their sponsorship, and then we'll go to break.
The Wolf Farming Company got started in 1974 by my parents, Jack and Bernice Wolf. We've been supporters of Western Growers for the last 25 years because they've been involved in so many of the issues that are important to us. Western Growers has had quite an impact on our operation as well as many of our neighbors. They're set up to really meet the needs of the fresh produce industry in the Western U.S., and they're focused on issues and policy items that, quite frankly, impact all of agriculture. So that involves immigration, other labor-related issues, water rights, a whole host of things. Going forward, our challenges are only going to grow. We're going to need a good, strong, trusted voice. Quite frankly, Western Growers is that voice. Western Growers has been there for us time and time again, when and where we've needed them most. And I fully expect them to be there in the future for growers like me and you.